Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Conversation with Friends. This week, we're doing a sideways step, and we have Ben Lawless with us in the studio today. It will become apparent why me and Ben are connected. But, Ben, welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I've been dying to get on the show for quite a while, as you know, with all of my constant naggings. Here I am.
Brilliant. So, Ben, you are an educator. You are an alternative educator, somebody who's looking to push the boundaries, and you work in schools and you consult for schools.
Yeah, I teach part-time at a K to 12 school, where I'm lucky enough to have a very open job where I do education research, and I make games at that school. I teach teachers at Melbourne Uni as well. I go around and work with schools to improve their assessment. I guess my main passion is making games.
Yep.
In the middle of making one about engagement right now. If this one's successful, hopefully it will be played in every school in the state. And I've just enrolled to do a PhD on learning game design, so I love working
Fabulous.
hard.
And so education, that's kind of our common ground. We're in the fundraising space, but the reason we connected was earlier this year, I'm going to do one of my favourite things this year so far, and that was going to Aiken College and working with the entire Year 9 cohort at the beginning of the year. And that was kind of inspiring them and giving them kind of some motivation around their community immersion project.
Oh, yeah, look, and I've been wanting to thank you because they're so much better this year after that. So, quite a few high schools in Australia have a Year 9 program. So, often Year 9 is a year when students become less engaged, and so schools try to do something a bit different. We've just started on our January, so we have what's called a service project where they manage a project across the whole semester. And we were lucky to have you out to do an immersion day where we did fun activities and they brainstormed ideas about what kind of stuff they want to do. But I think probably the most powerful thing, or at least we found asking them later, was the power of your story and what you've done and your experiences.
Yes,
Um,
I
it's
did enjoy that. It's yeah, a whole year of year nines is challenging, but what I love, this brings my entire kind of career together, which started off with youth work, working with young people, empowering them to give a voice, to make changes in their community, different kind of setting, but then on to the charity sector and kind of leadership and fundraising. And I think one of the 99% of my fundraising guests, all of them have said, we did not set out to be a fundraiser. There is no professional career path to becoming a fundraiser. And that's why I love the potential of connecting with schools to kind of, we're not going to create professional pathways immediately, but planting the seeds to young people that there is a world. The third sector, we've got the public sector, the private sector, but nobody says, I want to be a CEO of a charity.
No, right. And really sadly, I was taking a class the other day and the students are writing CVs. And I went and saw what this girl was doing on an iPad, and she typed into her iPad jobs that pay more than $100,000. And I was just like, I don't think that's the right approach to finding a job. Like, the money is not going to matter, but the amount that you make a difference is going to make a huge, is going to, um, you probably know about this stuff, but I once read that the three things that motivate someone to enjoy their work is three things: mastery, so being able to get good at something; autonomy, being able to, if you've got a function, being able to do it in the way that you want and structure it, blah, blah, blah. And then the third one is making a difference.
Yep.
Now, I think that you and me are both, we're really lucky in what we do because that, um, being a chief nester and being an educator both tick all of those boxes. But when you came
Absolutely.
to our school, it was interesting because a lot of the stories that you told about kids their age was back from the rough old days in Scotland, right?
Yep.
And these kids, like, through no fault of their own, live quite sheltered lives, like they've got middle class parents, and yes, they've got well-being issues like a lot of young people do, which is something I've been reading about heaps at the moment, but they don't have experience about, like, oh yeah, the youth centre's been firebombed
Yep.
or whatever. So it was the I think part of the whole thing, and what was really powerful about when you came, was kind of bringing them out of their comfortable little boxes and showing them that there's big problems out there.
One of the things that kind of surprised me more, I absolutely knew I was going into an environment where, the what the stories I were telling was kind of to inspire them, and the the situations were very, very different. However, I was quite shocked as I was going around the groups and we were asking them to kind of have that blue sky thinking around if you could do anything, if you could, if you could make any change in your community in the second half of the year, what societal issue would you like to address? And they were just stuck. And quite a few of the groups were asked me to explain several times, what do you mean? And I was like, so what do what's your, what do you care about? Is it the environment? Is it animals? Is it homelessness? Is it um, and there was a real kind of genuine disconnect that
Mm.
there's issues and there's organizations out there that they could align with and potentially volunteer with. That I find that very surprising.
I think I would reckon they'd be quite confused when you said local community, right? Because
Yeah,
most of them won't know their neighbours, they won't know the people that live across the road. I don't like. I harp on about this at the moment because I've just finished a book about it, the anxious generation, which talks about the huge change, certainly in youth culture, since about 2010, when every single 12-year-old was giving a smartphone, and what shocking results we've seen from that. And I think one of them is the loss of community. So,
yeah,
you know, when was the last time you saw kids playing out on the street?
yeah. So their
You know,
community is now a virtual community.
yeah, and we've been misled to believe that the quality of your interactions online through text is the same as speaking to someone in person. Now, what we're doing is fine because we can see each other, we can get all the visual cues. But when you're, having a million message threads with all of your friends at
Yeah.
home on your phone, it's not the same as going around to someone's house.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And so when we look at, that's what excites me in the schools that are embracing the opportunity, because traditional learning is not for everyone, and that's kind of where you fit into this space too by gamifying things. And some of the things we do at the fundraising nest, we add badges in the community hub, and we all accept that times are changing, but the fundamental principles of for fundraising is building relationships and powerful storytelling, and the fundamental principles of education, I'm sure, haven't changed. There's just different ways of delivering them.
Mm. And if anything, I personally love technology, but in terms of using it in my teaching, as over the 10 years of me being a teacher, I think I shy away from it more and more. I find it a huge distraction, So kids typically in a class now have got, even if their school enforces the no phone rule, 99% of them have got the phone in their pocket, and they've also got an iPad on the desk at the same time, and I'm trying to get their attention. Yeah, that's why I'm zany, because I'm like competing against like these dopamine machines.
Yeah,
The thing
yeah.
that
And
must be,
so again, what do you love most about being an educator?
I love being creative. So I
Yeah,
love making stuff. So there you go, there's a painting behind me. Yay.
yeah.
That's actually an interesting story. It's a painting I did a painting for my ex-wife for her 30th, and then she moved back to the UK, and I said, do you want to go how's on shipping the painting back to the UK? She's like, no, that's fine, darling. I'm like, well, all right, screw you. So I painted over it.
It's
Um,
awesome.
and I painted over the love poem I wrote on the back. Sorry, little insight into my life. Yeah, I love being creative. I find I personally get bored really easily, so my lessons are always like some mad thing happening, and kids can take me on all kinds of weird tangents. I really enjoy working with young people. Young people have a really positive outlook. There's so much. I feel like they see the possibility and the potential. They haven't got to that life stage of cynicism, apathy, boredom, ennui. They like to have a good time. I try to be, I try to be funny in class, and young people really appreciate that. And
Yeah.
like every day as a teacher there's no 2 days the same. It's just
And it's
constant
tough.
process
It's
management.
tough. And one of the things we obviously, education is it's lifelong, and that was something I totally met the idea of that when I left school early. That's kind of no secret that I left school with minimal qualifications due to what was going on in my life at the time. But the idea that I would pick up, I thought the only kind of education you could do as an adult would be to get a degree or go and study or go to university, and it was a real kind of barrier for me initially in my career that I didn't have a formal degree behind me. All of the people I worked with seemed to have degree after degree. But what I missed was that education and training comes in so many different formats that I have
Mm.
actually been trained and educated throughout my whole career and taken every opportunity for internal or external training. And so I think what I would like to see is a shift in schools, that education isn't just academic, and for schools to really encourage that quest and that, that love of lifelong learning through books, through courses.
Yeah, totally. I actually just recently did a conference presentation to about 200 private school principals in Sydney, so that was interesting, about self-regulated learning, which is kind of how
Mm-hmm.
adults learn in the real world. They do it themselves, like what do you like if you make students too reliant on a teacher, then what happens when the teacher's not there? They're not going to learn, right? one
Yeah.
one of the big negative outputs from one of the big lessons that students learn from school accidentally is how to be helpless, right? Oh, I don't know something, I'll ask the teacher, they'll tell me straight away, cool. Or like, I need to learn this thing, oh, I can't be bothered, don't worry, someone else is going to be there to extrinsically motivate me to do it. And if you look at
And now
school,
they've got, now they've got AI and they've got all sorts of
right,
things. That critical thinking piece is more important now than it ever was.
right, and low level, like, I don't know who said it, but like our school system values 20th century stuff when actually we should be valuing 21st century stuff. So like, EQ is probably more important than IQ for most jobs these days. Look at all the stuff that's in danger of being automated or taken over by AI. It's not just physical labor jobs, which is why men have been so screwed over by a lot of the changes in the employment market, but even, and I would actually quite like if AI could take over some of teaching. Like one of the things about self-regulated learning is providing students with learning objects, so like a mini lesson.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good that they can do it without me needing to be there, right? I mean, obviously, learning is still social and you would still build elements like that into a classroom, but it's really inefficient for me to sit there and say blah, 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 the same thing once a year when I can pre-record it. I mean, look at the people, like half the kids in my class who are mad geniuses about something have learned it all themselves off YouTube, right?
Yes.
You could do an entire K-12 education if you had self-regulated learning skills just
Yep.
on YouTube and other free stuff. Like most of Khan Academy is free, so
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a real that whole self-learning, especially if it's something you're interested in, if it's something that you actually want to learn, you want to, get that craft at. I think there's real scope for alternative ways of learning. So, Ben, what scares you the most about the future of education?
Well, there's something that I wanted to talk to you about that's, I think there's a bit of an overlap between what you do and this Anxious Generation book, which is swirling around my mind at the moment, which is the huge decrease in mental health amongst youth since 2010.
Yeah.
And you look at the data, like, okay, this author says he thinks it's because of social media, video games, and porn. So social media for girls, porn and video games for boys. And whether that's true or not, the fact remains that mental health for youth has dropped massively and really quickly since about 2010, which was the same time we got these, whether or not it's causal or not. But the thing I'm thinking about, as someone who works in fundraising, is there a much greater need in that area than there used to be? I know in all the schools that I work with, they're like, our counselling team just cannot cope with the amount of students who need counselling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, before COVID, it was particularly bad, but the mental health organisations, and I was in New Zealand then, absolutely, they have never, ever, there's never been a bigger need for mental health charities, particularly for young people. The suicide rates for young boys, young men are significant. They're not spoken about nearly enough. And yes, it's they just, the load on the charity sector to support what is a critical situation, I think in Australia and New Zealand, it's a huge responsibility for a charitable organisation to manage, and I think they cannot meet the demand.
Mm. It's unfortunately a growth industry, and on behalf of everyone, thank you for what you do, because
Mm.
the need has never been greater. To go back to your question, what worries me about the future of education? This is a specifically Australian point to make. So sorry if this doesn't work in other countries, but in Australia, we've got this very unique situation where we have three school systems. You got your private schools, which is typically, sometimes they're religious, sometimes not. Or sorry, they're called independent. They're usually high fee, say somewhere between 10 and 50. Some of them are up to 50 grand a year. That's like more than university. Anyway, then you got your Catholic system, which is 5 to 10 grand a year, and then you got your state system, which is everybody else, right? So schools where I went to school in New Zealand, there's no private schools. Everybody just goes to the local state school. That's the only thing you can do. And then you have this huge social mixing, right? So the rich mix with the poor, the brown, the yellow, the white, the blue, the gay, the straight, everybody, which I think is amazing for social mobility and social dynamism. Like think of all of the amazing scientific breakthroughs or startup companies that started up with a dude from here and the wealth distribution and this guy. Whereas in Australia, they're all completely siloed based on how much money your parents can afford to chuck into your...
Actually, and you've just put in that missing piece of the jigsaw that shocked me so much at your school, in the sense that you're right, they don't have the social economic children who are struggling with their packed lunch. So the idea that there's hunger with families, or that there's families I know worked with in New Zealand who sometimes, if there were several siblings, they would share different school days because they only had one uniform between them. The harsh realities, because and when you're right, when everyone's just at school, like you go to, I did in Scotland and my kids did in New Zealand, you just go to the local school, and so there you're naturally exposed to a whole range of good and bad.
Right, and so empathy, like anything else, is a skill that can be learned. And if you don't see people from very different backgrounds, then how are you going to learn to empathize and develop your compassion? So the siloing of young people, because, the school kids of today is the entire society in 5-10 years. So, I mean, maybe it's always been like this in Australia, but, like Australia kids itself.
It's being driven by the parents who want their children to be kept in a bubble.
Right, and a big research study comes out once every 6 months and becomes quite public, saying that actually once you control for socioeconomic status, the private schools don't generate more education, better grades than state schools. For some reason, that's, even though education researchers make this point very regularly, your average parent thinks, I mean, I've had arguments with people at parent-teacher interview where they're like, well, I'm paying you $8,000 a year. Why am I sending my kid to a tutor as well? And I say, do you think the $8,000 is making your kid brainier? It actually just gets me a nicer lunch, mate. And they're quite surprised by that, because we've got this myth of school choice, right? Schools don't make that much difference. It's the teacher that you have that makes a difference. And the teacher quality between the schools is the same, because we all go to the same teacher training, we all do the same PD.
It's like
there's a
doctors
lot
at
of myths
hospital.
out there about education.
People think they're going to the private hospitals, they're getting the private surgeons. Those private surgeons work in the local state hospital and their own clinics, and they do the private hospitals. Not every single city has, surgeons dedicated to private and public sector. It is true, and you're right, it is a perception of the world, it is something that people know, but yet they still want to maintain this level of what they think they're doing right, and I think the more conversations that I had about these things, the better. I would love to see a way where the kind of professional pathway into the charity sector is something that's spoken about in schools. It's something that's part of the career plans. It's something that is well known, that is something that is well versed. Being the CEO of a charity, or being even, just the fundraising manager of a charity, is incredibly complex. We don't just shake buckets and ask people for money. It is it's a real skill.
We
it's
wash
a real
windows
craft.
as well. Well, I mean, honestly, I think that you coming to my school would have at least made people realise that is a thing that they could do, right?
Yeah.
You can only do, Rumsfeld's saying the unknown unknowns. Like, it's only when people find out that is such a thing, right?
Absolutely. And I am really excited to broaden that. And I would love to be visiting schools, all around Victoria. And that is definitely one of my projects for later in the year. Okay, Ben, before we wrap up, a little bit about Ben. I'm going to do this or that. It tells you a little bit about you. First one that comes to your head, please. There's 10 of them. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Mountains or beaches?
Mountains.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert, but am I allowed to comment? Because people have got the definitions around the wrong way. But anyway, yeah.
Movies or books?
Movies,
Tea or coffee?
straight vodka. No, coffee.
Cats or dogs?
I prefer dogs, but I've only ever had cats, so
Morning
dogs.
bird or night owl?
Uh, Night owl.
Camping or hotels?
Camping. Camping
Phone
in a
calls,
hotel.
phone calls or text messages?
I should say phone calls, but no, I do text way more. Sometimes someone rings you on your phone, you're like, what? No one uses a phone for that anymore.
Pizza or curry?
Pizza.
Marmite or honey?
That's a very Kiwi thing. Don't you mean Vegemite? I reckon half the Aussies won't know what you're talking about. Vegemite. There's Vegemite, and then there's the Vegemite's the Aussie one, Marmite's the Kiwi one. Marmite, if you're used to Vegemite, tastes really weird. And then, of course,
Ah,
you've got
I
all
don't
the
like, well, I
English,
hate this stuff, but it was Marmite in the UK too. What was your answer?
Marmite or Vegemite.
Vegemite.
Hmm.
Ben, it's been a privilege chatting to you. Thank you so much. We will share the links to Lawless Education and the games that Ben does. Do explore them. And I look forward to our next conversation with friends. But thank you again, Ben, for your time and for giving me the opportunity to come to Aitken College. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. It's been awesome to get to know you and been really lucky to do some work with you this year.
Kia ora. Thank you, Ben.